Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Um, okay. First, we have a little housekeeping. First things first, before we start, see, I brought at this time I was running my house list, but last week I forgot the name of a sefer that I quoted. So it's called Rinat Ha'emunah. It's actually a really, really interesting book, Rav Aaron Rabinovich. And it deals with different issues in like Una and Hashkafa in psychology and Torah. Just quite an interesting book. So this is what I called last week. I apologize. I didn't remember the name. If anyone's here and wants to look at it, show and tell, be my guest. Okay. Hi, guys. So before we sort of jump into part two, I want to just address some, okay. Probably the coolest thing that ever happened to me as a teacher was the fact that someone who was in the shir last week wrote a response to the shir. That's like a really neat thing to happen when you're a teacher, because when you're a teacher, you're really a shaliach, meaning I could be teaching science and I'm a shaliach for the, like understanding how science works in the world. But when you're a shaliach of Torah, that means like your whole goal is that people should be exposed to different ideas and thinking about them and working through them. So the fact that someone took time to say, like, I'm actually going to write a response, I thought was really amazing. We actually had quite an interesting back and forth and dialogue. So I just wanted to clarify one thing that maybe I was not clear on. Okay. People who are criminals, meaning people who are criminals should be, like tried by the justice system and go to jail and have their rights and due process, v'chule, v'chule. But the point is that people who do things like vandalism or harming people, things like that, criminal actions, that is not okay. And it is not okay no matter what the reason behind that is. In fact, that's actually part of what we're going to talk about today in the shir. So based on that response, it made me realize that maybe I was not as clear as I could be or should be in that. I think if I'm going to be frank, I'm a little bit less like nervous than I was last week to tackle such a complicated topic. I think that the last years have been so fraught that it's like a balloon that's been blown up and 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 blown up. And then with the protests that happened last week, that was like one last like into the balloon and then it exploded. That doesn't mean that it was right or okay, but I think more in terms of the extremist behavior, again, burning things, vandalizing things, stopping people, pulling them out of their cars, attacking police, all of that is not okay. It would be shocking to hear someone say that it's okay. But I think that sometimes what happens is that we like lump them together and say, like, the Haredim, the Chilonim, the Dati Leumi community, like whoever it is that, and that was more what I was trying to address, because I think that it's so easy to get into this like game of everyone, everyone looks the same. Like like I always tell my kids that if they go somewhere, or my students, if they go to a restaurant, you have to actually walk into the restaurant and look for the tuada. You can't just assume because there's like from people eating in the restaurant that it's kosher, because right, like that's how mistakes are made, because one person makes a mistake and then all of a sudden there's like 20 people eating in this restaurant that's not a kosher restaurant. So the same way as we shouldn't make a like sort of broad assumption there. I think that's true here, and we have to keep things in their categories. So what I was more trying to address was more like, number one, what can we do here, even when the balloon is like stretched so thin, to try to keep like a proper perspective, and also how can we try to like be generous in that perspective and think more broadly. But again, obviously things that are criminal are criminal. So I want to just reiterate that part to be clear. If anyone has like thoughts or questions, you could jump in, because Melissa has these cool microphones. So that, I don't know, I've like told a lot of people about these microphones. I was like, it's really cool. So, okay. And then just to sort of, for people who maybe didn't hear the first shear, essentially I had to boil it all down. We said a lot, we learned a lot, but I think sort of the emotional nakuda that I want to start us off with is again this idea of from Rabbi Lamb that we want to halt the unraveling of our oneness as a people, meaning we do not want to unravel as Am Yisrael. And in order to be, mixed up together properly, we need all different types of people, and we should value that. Okay, so that's a little bit of review. Now let's move forward. I brought here actually a few very famous examples of Tanakh. That doesn't mean if you don't know these examples that there's something wrong with you. It just means that these are examples. I tried to bring ones actually that are maybe a little bit more tried and true, so we're familiar with them. Because what's really interesting is that when we look at all of our heroes in Tanakh, all of the people that we look to, and we think about who is afraid and when they are afraid and who has different types of nisyono, different types of challenges and tests, and when they're able to sort of like walk into the fire with those tests and when they recoil from those tests, I think that we can find a very interesting common factor. So we're gonna go through tonight 3 examples, and then we'll sort of put it together at the end. So the first one's from Sefer Bereshit, and that is with Yaakov Avinu. Okay, and we see Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim. I'm already apologizing if I have to do a job more outside. It's just because I have this cold and maybe I can talk less. Lifanav Elisav Achiv, or Elisav Achiv Artza, excuse me, so we know that now we're going to have this big meeting between Yaakov and between Esav, and Esav, that Esav sends word that he's coming to meet Yaakov with 400 men. Vayar, I'm at the underline. Vayar Yaakov me'od, vayitzar lo, vayachit et ha'am asher ito, ve'et ha'tzom, ve'et ha'bakar, ve'et ha'gamalim l'shtei machanot. So what Yaakov is very scared, and we know that he divides everything that he has. And why does he divide? Rashi says there, because he's worried that everything's going to get destroyed, right? And at least if Esav destroys and attacks one half, then he'll still have the other half, meaning he won't lose everything. It was a strategy. If you look at the Rashbam, right, the Rashbam says, Vayar Yaakov Bilibo. By the way, what's the difference between Rashi and the Rashbam? That Rashi, first of all, who was the Rashbam to Rashi? What? Yeah, good. Grandson. That Rashi's approach is that the way you understand the pshat of the text is via midrash. He says that explicitly. And the Rashbam very often disagrees with Rashi because he says, no, the pshat is the pshat, the drash is the drash. It's just an important thing to know when you read the Rashbam. So, Vayar Yaakov Bilibo, Sha'af al pi sheher'a l'shluchim ki lichvodo mikavein, that even though Esav sent these like messengers to say like, we're coming, it's a delegation, it's going to be like a peace summit, that Yaakov was worried that he was up to no good and he was going to trick him, meaning he didn't have faith in Esav and that Esav would be good to his word. And of course, we know that later on that day, that Yaakov essentially crosses his family over the Nachal, over the river, and it says, "Vayivater Yaakov levado, ve'avak ish imo ad alot hashachar." And then he wrestles, right? He wrestles with a man, he wrestles with a malach. That's a very interesting machlok at Rishonim. But essentially, he has this wrestling match with this angel, and then we know that he demands a bracha from him. So if you look at the Rashbam there, right down there as well, it says, Vayivater Yaakov levado, klomar, shehavir kol asher lo, right? Shelo haya ud la'avor el bulado. He had brought everyone over. It was only him. V'ratza la'avor achareihem. He wanted to come after them. Why? Ki livroach derech acheret shelo yifkeshenu Esav nikavein. Because he basically wanted to go a different way so that he didn't end up encountering Esav. Meaning, I guess Yaakov must have had some kind of faith that if Esav would have run into like the rest of his family, I guess like he'd sort of let them go. But he's really gunning for Yaakov. And Yaakov said, okay, let me get them all over. You can actually imagine it, right? In a movie or something. Like, let me cross everyone there. And then I'm going to sneak over a different way because Esav, that way I can just ignore and avoid the entire thing. I'm going to just avoid it because I'm so scared of Esav. And then what happens? Hashem sends a malach, shelo yuchal livroach, so that he couldn't run away. Right? And why? Vayirah kiyum shela kadosh baruch hu shelo yizikehu Esav. And that way he could see the fulfillment of this promise that Hashem made that Esav would not harm him. And in fact, the Rashbam goes on to say that actually the reason why Yaakov gets injured in this wrestling match is that, meaning that Hashem basically is punishing him for not having enough emunah that he's trying to like go around. Okay, so that's the first example. That what we see here is that Yaakov, like Ad Kedei Kach, the Rashbam says, that he was even going to sort of sneak a different way so that he could avoid Esav. Okay, everyone, like put that over here in that corner. I want to move to the second example, because by the time we get to all three, I'm hoping it's going to be quite clear. Okay, you guys can all teach this year. Second comes in Shmuel Parag, right? This is Moshe at the Sneh. Vayomer Moshe al Hashem, Bi Hashem lo ish devarim anochi. By the way, if anyone has heard like on Mordechai Shapiro's newest album, if people like here listen to Mordechai Shapiro, I know he's not Israeli, but like he's like has an Israeli accent, but he actually has a beautiful musical, like he takes all these psukim about Moshe Rabbeinu saying that like I'm not an ish devarim and I'm like scared and who are they going to listen to? And it's really magnificent. Okay, I'm not Mordechai Shapiro's but it's really a beautiful song if you're into music. So he says, Lo ish devarim anochi, gam itmol gam yishilshom, gam me'az dabracha el avdecha, ki chavad peh uchvad lashon anochi. Right? We know Moshe says to Hashem, I cannot do this. I have a speech problem. I have a speech impediment. We know here, of course, the famous midrash about Moshe, how did he get his speech impediment? That when he was little and Paro was suspicious and the coals and the gold, and that he was reaching for the gold and the malach pushed his hands and he put the hot burning fingers on his mouth and he got the speech impediment. But essentially, what does Hashem say to him then? Vayomer Hashem elav, mi sam pela adam, Omi yasum ilem ocheresh opikach oliver halo anochi Hashem. Meaning Hashem is like, what is your problem, Moshe, so to speak? Meaning, like, who is the one that is in charge of every faculty, not just speech, but I'm the one who runs the world. So you're here, standing here saying, like, I can't speak. Like, who are you to say this? And this, by the way, is where we see really almost, again, I'm not putting Dibra Torah b'lashon b'nei adam. The Torah speaks in a way that we can understand it. So Hashem doesn't get frustrated, right? Because Hashem is beyond emotions. But you can almost, if we would think about it in a human way, see this like frustration, like Moshe, what are you even saying? So if you look there, the Ramban here says, so wild that Moshe, again, Gami Mol, Gami Shalshom, that Moshe is saying that his whole life, Lamanu Shekol, Shiv'ah Haya Kadosh Baruch excuse me, that's an important part. That Moshe is at the Sneh for a week, and Hashem spends a week trying to basically like, Moshe, like you could do it. By the way, it's just like in our Parsha. That's exactly the same thing that happens in Parshat B'Shalach that we just. All Parshat B'Shalach is a series of events where God teaches Israel, I know that you're scared. I know you're used to relying on a Melech Basar Adam, on Paro, but you can rely on me. And it's each thing when Bnei Israel are kvetching, Hashem just fixes. It's only at the end when Amalek comes, right? That Hashem is like, Ad Khan, like you were learning. Now you need to know. And so Hashem does the same pattern. I mean, obviously this is previous to that, but it's the same pattern. It's teaching for a week. And finally, like sort of Moshe crossed the line. And if you look, we'll just do the underlines. It says, Valderach Hapshat Yomar. Ki ani kvad peh gamit mol gami shalshom. Moshe said, like, I've been a kvad peh. Ki ata shani zaken. And also now that I'm old, like, and you want me to go and be this leader. I'm this like wizened, experienced, elderly person, and I'm supposed to be the leader. I've had this my whole life. V'gam me'az dvarecha hayom el avadecha. One second. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in Dabrecha. Sorry. I read that wrong. I'm in the Ramban, the last source at the bottom of the page. Kilo hasirot kabdut pi b'tzivitza utilalech el paro l'daber b'shmecha. Like Hashem, you know what you could have done so easily? Yeah, like why don't you just take away my speech impediment? Like I've been there whole life. That would have been like a real quick fix. And V'im came, and since you haven't, like how am I supposed to go? Paro was like the world leader. So Moshe's like, this is how you're sending me? You couldn't just fix this, Hashem? V'nei Moshe, may now listen to this. This is wild. Sometimes the Ramban's really, really like fun, whatever, maybe I shouldn't say this, but fun to learn because sometimes the Ramban just says things that like no one else could ever say except for the Ramban. So like this, V'hinei Moshe, may rov chafatzo shelo ilech Moshe, out of his like great desire to not do this job, lo yipalel afanav yibarach she'asir kvedu piv. He didn't daven that Hashem should fix his speech. Aval ta'an acharei shelo hasirot kavdu pi me'et shedibarti lalechet al tetaveni she'elech ki lo yitaken la'adon kol yishloch shaliach harel sfatayim el melech amim. So look what Moshe does. So classic, right? Then what does he say? The Ramban says he didn't daven. He didn't want to go. So he didn't daven. And then Hashem didn't fix his speech impediment. And then he said, how could you send me with a speech impediment? Right? I feel like that has happened to each one, like all of us, maybe in our families, right? And what happens? V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, kevan shelo yitpalel bakach, lo ratzah l'refuato. Since Moshe didn't daven, God was like, I'm not going to heal you. Aval amro, anochi ehyeh im picha. Like, I'm going to still make sure that the speech thing comes out okay. Like, you don't have to worry, Moshe, because your destiny is to be the leader of Am Yisrael, and your destiny is to go to Paro. So had you davened, yeah, I would have fixed your speech. But you're so busy trying to get out of your job that, by the way, I'm giving you, now you're going to go, and I'm not going to fix your speech, and it's still going to be fine, and you have to see. And in case you think I'm making it up, if you look at the bottom of the page, what does the Ramban say? V'hanachon beinai she'amar Hashem leMoshe mi sam pel adam u'mi yasum ilim halo anochi Hashem osek. I do everything. U'biadi lirapota otcha. I could have healed you. Ve'ata, and now even because you didn't daven, lech el asher ani metzaveh lecha. Go where I'm telling you to go. You are going to have a successful shlichut, Moshe. Okay, fine. So essentially, you guys get the point. It's a wild point that the Ramban is making here. Like, Moshe, you a little bit brought this on yourself. I would have helped you, but you're so busy trying to get out of it. Now, why is Moshe so busy trying to get out of it? So first we see like this. Now we had Yaakov. Yaakov, who could have gone over with his family, but according to the Rashbam, stayed behind because he was trying to get away from Esau. Moshe, who could have gone to Hashem, but according to the Ran, he just didn't want to do this job so very much that then he tried to say, I'm not qualified. So thanks, but no. Thanks, but no thanks. Okay? And now let's bring in one more example. And that is from Sefer Yonah. Okay? We all know the beginning of Sefer Yonah, Perek Aleph. Vayidvar Hashem al Yonah Hashem tells Yonah to go to Nineveh. And we know Yonah runs away, milifnei Hashem. So the Radak there, of David Kimchi, spends time like sort of dissecting what does it mean to run away, milifnei Hashem? Why is Yonah, what exactly is going on here? Okay, and how does Yonah really think that he's going to run away, that he's going to run from God? And he says, I'll skip maybe to the second line. Like, Yonah was wise, right? How on earth does he think he's going to run away from Hashem? And by the way, Yonah was a very spiritual person because does anyone know? Who was Yonah?
He was revived.
Yeah, by who?
By what's his name? Elisha.
Not Elisha.
Not Elisha.
Eliah.
Eliah.
Right. Meaning one of my favorite principles in learning Tanakh is what's called the conservation of personalities, which is essentially when you have like an unnamed person or like a random person, Chazal always try to figure out who that is. Like a good example is Shifra and Pua are Yocheved and Miriam, because like why would we care about these two random ladies, Shifra and Pua, or Hagar is Bat Paro, because like what? Why is that significant? Okay, so here the Chazal that who unnamed boy that Eliyahu Hanavi saves. And why is that significant? Because that boy is Yonah. And essentially, what is the mitzvah that Eliyahu has? Right, going to the mat for their cause. And so when you can almost like picture it, that's why it's wrong when people think what Eliyahu was doing was like CPR. It wasn't that, it was like chest compressions, but it was a very spiritual thing that he was like breathing in some like ruach neshama. I'm not pretending to really understand this, into Yonah. And so now Yonah was a smart guy and he was a frum guy, right? He knows he can't run away from Hashem. So what is he trying to do? And he says, Ela milifnei Hashem haya choshev livroach, ki perush milifnei midvar shehu lifnei Hashem v'hu ruach hanevuah. He was running away from the thing that made him be lifnei Hashem, and that was his prophecy. Meaning that was his special thing that made him more God, God's limelight, for lack of a better term. It was like the thing that's where Hashem caught him most of all. You know what I'm saying? It's like if you have a kid in the class that oh gosh, okay, I'll tell you a story. As a teacher, one of the most like depressing things in the world as a teacher right now is if you say to your class, is anyone else here a teacher? That if you say to your class, like, guys, like, who's read? It doesn't matter what the rest of that sentence is. I could say, like, who's read Harry Potter? And like half the class hasn't even read Harry Potter. I'm like, guys, I'm not talking about like, Catcher in the Rye. I'm talking about like Harry Potter. So like who usually in the class, there's like one gem of a reader. And you know that when you say, who's read Julius Caesar? They'll be like, so all of a sudden, what happens? I know that if I said who's read, I go like straight to the bullseye, like Sprinza. Have you read that? Right? So Lahadil, that's the same thing. Yonah said the thing that like puts me in like God's crosshairs in a good way, usually, is the fact that I have nevuah. So what was Yonah doing? He was running away from that like koach that Hashem gave him. And where was he going? He was going to Chutz La'aretz, because the idea that there's no, that God's not like shoreh on a person in Chutz La'aretz. And why was he doing that? And here's in the underlines, but maybe I'll just say it outside, the famous midrash that why did Yonah want to run away from Nineveh? Because if you compare Nineveh and Am Yisrael at the time for Yonah, that he said, oh, look what's going to happen. Bnei Israel are busy doing a whole lot of bad. And by the way, how do you know that? This is part of why it's important to understand that the person Eliyahu revived was Yonah, because that means that Yonah was living in a post-Achav world, and things were not looking good in Sefer Malachim, in the post-Achav world. And so, because Eliyahu was the Navi that was assigned to Achav. So Yonah said, if I go and people in Nineveh do tshuva, so they're going to tshuva. And then that's going to make Am Yisrael look even worse. So I can't like have that happen. So what am I going to do? I'm going to just run away and avoid the whole thing. So now here we have Yaakov, and here we have Moshe, and here we have Yonah. And I was thinking, like in my chicken scratch over here, I was writing down like a list, like who like shows fear and who doesn't show fear. And I started just like writing down examples, just ones I could think of off the top of my head. And you know what the great is? If one can think of something that goes against this, I'd be curious. But the great divide is that when it is what?
Women.
Not women. Women. Come on, man, Melissa. Not women.
There's
Meaning that the women didn't have fear? Oh, I didn't understand what. Yeah, right. The women don't. That's true. That's true. But even if you think about like Avraham, no, I agree. That's true. That like Avram going to the Akedah, or Yoshua or Pinchas. What's the difference when it comes to something that Hashem puts in front of me, I can rely on my emuna in Hashem because I know what those terms are. Now, maybe not all of us sitting around the table. I don't want to speak for you. I can speak for myself. I certainly have what to do in my own emuna and bitachon, work to do in my emuna and bitachon to strengthen it. But if you're thinking about Avraham Avinu, how is Avraham Avinu going to the Akedah, right? Because Avraham Avinu has emuna, so to him it's like clear. Even let's fast forward later on to like the end part, like later on in Moshe Rabbeinu's life. We're talking about the beginning of Moshe's journey, right? But the Meshech Chachma actually says that by the end of his life, Moshe lost his free will. But what does that mean? He lost his free will? It was a punishment? No. It wasn't a punishment. It's that it was so clear to him what Hashem said was the emet. Like there was no choice anymore for Moshe Rabbeinu. It was just like obvious. So when it's between a person and God, it might be hard, but it's not scary. But when it comes down to a person and the rest of Am Yisrael or another person, ooh la la, is that scary and unpredictable? And maybe I should just avoid the whole thing. So when Yaakov says, let me just try to not even meet Esav, because Esav is a wild card, and who on earth knows what he's going to do? Now, again, what Chazal say? It's a Choser Emunah because he really believes in Hashem. So that I get that. But I'm saying, forget the answer. Let's just think about the human emotion behind it. Yeah.
A proof to what you're saying is David.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Wait, Melissa's saying. You'll say it.
David God, Nipladna Biad Hashem. I don't know if that's the pasuk. He when he gives a choice of David gets a choice of what the punishment should be. He prefers something that a God-given punishment as opposed to an enemy, because an enemy they're unhinged. Right. But God, at least I know he has not come in and
exactly. Exactly. Good. Right. Exactly. So that idea. The same thing with Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe says, I can't do this job. And by the way, this is again, it's a whole separate shir. But either Moshe understands that Hashem has this power. He literally just spent a week like having a chavrusa with Hashem, right? Hashem's showing him all these otol, motim, all these different things, and don't worry. But Moshe's like, okay, we're good. But now I have to go to this king that is like, I'll use that word. Okay, like that. And I'm going to lead this people. Don't forget what happened to Moshe before he runs away. He saves a Jew. And then he tries to get all the Jew by the Jew. They're not like, thank you so much for coming. That was shocking to Moshe Rabbeinu. He ran away, right? He said, right, Achenu Dadavar. I thought I was doing something good. I thought Am Yisrael would have my back. I thought whatever. Oh my gosh. And then you have Yonah. Yonah's like, here I am, and I'm supposed to be a Navi B'Yisrael. My whole job is to be a leader, is to give wisdom. And by the way, this is where you really see that influence of Eliyahu, because in the history of the world, right, Eliyahu is probably the only Navi that got like fired by God. That when Hashem fired.
Yeah, fired.
Oh, okay. So that, right, that when Hashem takes him and he hears the kol zimama daka, right? If you look at the bookends and Hashem says to him, Malacha po Eliyahu, like what are you looking for? And Eliyahu says, like, I can't, Am Yisrael, like it's so hard because I just did this whole miracle of where I defeated the Nevi'ei Habal and Aneni Hashem, right? And there's this huge miracle and all of Bnei Israel teshuva, and it's amazing and it's fantastic, and they kill all the Nevi'ei Habal, and then the next day they sort of just revert right back. And that's when Eliyahu runs away and he says, Hashem, I can't do this. I can't do this. And when Hashem realizes that Eliyahu actually can't learn that lesson, that's when he, like, not exactly that second, but that's essentially when, like, the die is cast. And he says, Eliyahu, to be a leader of Am Yisrael, you don't just have to be a tzaddik, and you don't just have to be spiritual. You don't just have to, like, have a good relationship with me. You have to be able to manage Am Yisrael. Mm-hmm. And even to go back to Moshe Rabbeinu, that's his whole arc, right? Hashem sends Moshe and he learns how to manage Am Yisrael. But by the time we get to Sefer Bamidbar, which is like, I think just the most, it's like so tragic, Sefer Bamidbar, that right, Rav Soloveitchik has a famous idea that when Moshe hits the rock, what's the issue with Moshe hitting the rock? He gets angry. He gets angry at Am Yisrael. And then Hashem says to him, if you cannot go into the land of Israel as a leader, you can't go in at all, because that's your whole mahud. Like, that's who you are. It's your identity. So what we see, though, and I picked these 3 great people on purpose, and again, there's more examples, but what's the idea? Is that when we have to deal with each other, wow, that causes, number one, I fear, a lot of stress, and a lot of bad decision making. I'm not trying to criticize the decisions of the people in Tzach, but essentially, all 3, I feel like I can, because all 3, these are 3 clear examples where both Hashem and Chazal say they did the wrong thing. And in fact, in Yonah, what happens after he gets spit out by the Daga? He has to go right back. He has to tell Ninveh do tshuva, and then we have that whole story with the Kikayon, like he still hasn't learned the lesson of Rachamim. So when we deal with each other, that's much harder. But what happens now? Like, look at where we are. It's like so interesting. Look at where we are in the era of Am Yisrael right here. We are dealing with each other all the time and so much, and even more than we need to, because we have the second tiny thing happens, it's all over our phone. I'm flying to America tomorrow night, and all I do is look at my phone. I feel like I'm back in, I don't know, like more stressful times, because I'm like, if whatever is going to happen, it should be like Latova. But if something's going to happen, the airport's going to close, I just rather not get on the plane. You know what I'm saying? So, but I just keep like looking at the news like a maniac. It's not rational. So when every time I open the news, there's another story. There's another thing that happened. There's another this on the WhatsApp groups, on the news. So I'm not saying I think we should shut off the channels of communication. We need them, but we also need to be aware and cognizant of the fact that when we see like every single nook and cranny that happens all the time, that just exacerbates these feelings of stress. And by the way, that's not just us. Like, I don't mean just us sitting around this room or our communities. I think this is happening. Last week we shut off the cameras. I was telling a story about how I had an opportunity to sit with like people of lots of different hashkafas and lots of different points of view about like the army and whatever. And one of the women that I was talking to, she was like, the whole goal of the army is to strip the religion out of Am Yisrael. Okay, and that's really what she believes. And I was like, but how do you say that? Like, what's your proof? And she said, well, my brother is in the Rabbanut. And basically, what did she do? She was able to bring me this story, that story. And the thing is that and we all know, right? I think I'm not saying something blasphemous. Like, the army's not perfect. Nothing's perfect. No individual is perfect. Not everyone is like Liam Shem, right? Okay. But like, what I really saw from that conversation was, because that was her point of view, and then she had those examples in front of her, her level of stress about the army and the intentions of the army was like through the roof. And you know, maybe not as evidence-based as it could be or should be. And so that just gave me a lot of food for thought, because again, where do we do this in our own lives? Where do we have this? And if this happens to Yonah and Moshe Rabbeinu and Yaakov Avinu, so like, I'm pretty sure it's probably happening to us as well. And as I'm sorry I didn't put this on the sheet, I was running out of my house, I realized one of my favorite Rabbi Sachs books is To Heal a Fractured World. If you haven't read it, it's like every word of it is like just so magnificent. And I realized that I could, so again, I apologize for not putting on a sheet, but I just want to read like a tiny, like a little piece to you, because listen to what he says. He talks about, Rabbi Sachs says, for anyone who has it and wants like the exact, source, I'm on page 93. That he talks about how we know that it's like a single body and a single soul. They all feel the pain. It's not too much to say that this affirmation saved the Jewish people. So, okay, here we go. It offered a mystical definition of nation. Jews do not form a nation, says Rabbi Shimon, in any conventional sense. For if that were once true, it is no longer. They are a nation because, in a mystical sense, they are joined in a profound bond of fellow feeling and responsibility. They are like a single body and a single soul. Even if they're not united physically or politically, nonetheless, they are united spiritually. This is not something that can be described or defined within the normal categories of empirical politics, but it is felt by Jews at the deepest levels of emotion. When one Jew suffers, all Jews feel involved. It is as if the Jewish people is a single person. It was this that gave substance to Jewish nationhood when everything else was lost. Without it, Jews in exile might have gone their separate ways as individuals, and there would be no Jewish people today. And then he quotes Rav Shner Zalman of Liadi, who wrote the Tanya, and he said, therefore, all Israelites are called brothers by virtue of the source of their souls in the one God. Only their bodies are separated. Every Jewish soul is literally a part of God. Just as there can be no divisions with God, there can be no divisions within the collective Jewish soul. As Jews, we are individuals only as bodies, not as souls. When we live at the level of the body, giving primacy to physical perceptions and desires, there can be conflict between us. But when we live at the level of the soul, there is unity. And he basically says that this is like a mystical idea. And he says it ignores what we can see, the body, and focuses on what we cannot see, the soul. And so, and he brings actually halachic implications. Like if right now, I don't know, I had like apple slices or something, and I could pass them around the table, and there was someone here who didn't know how to make a bori priya eitz, I can make a bori priya eitz, and you could say amen, and you could be yotzei the bracha. How does that work? Because my soul is bound to your soul, and my bracha counts for your bracha. That's the whole concept of the shaliach tzibor. And so says Rabbi Sachs, quoting the Baal Tanya, this is what has saved Am Yisrael throughout history, that no matter what, we're always sort of drawn back together, even if we're pushing back. It reminds me when Rav Soloveitchik in Kol Judido Fake goes through the section, there's a chapter called the Six Knocks, which are, I feel like I could just give homework. Like if you haven't read the Six Knocks, you should read it. It's amazing. Mm-hmm. But the Six Knocks go through six ways that the founding of the state of Israel was the knocking on the door of Bnei Israel by Hashem. It's magnificent. Like I read it with my students every single year by Yom Ha'atzmaut. I probably read it like 40 times, and every time I read it, it's like I'm moved to tears from reading it. And one of the knocks Rav Soloveitchik talks about is he talks about the like pieces of Am Yisrael that are completely disconnected from Torah and mitzvot. And he says, because we have this unifier. We have a unifier called Medina Yisrael. And even if the person is like a leftist, liberal, anti-Torah, anti-religion, at least there's something to fight about. At least there's something to fight about. We can't ignore each other anymore because we have Medina Yisrael. And I was thinking that the same way as we can't ignore it on that side, so Medina Yisrael also forces us to not ignore it on that side. And so that doesn't mean all parents know that there is nothing you want more than quiet in your house and your kids fighting. But the real truth is, and trust me, I am like the queen of quiet, okay? Mm-hmm. But the real truth is, like I made a rule in my house. The rule in my house is, if you are in the kitchen, you are not allowed to have headphones in. You are not allowed to have headphones in. I don't care if you're listening to shir, baseball, music. You are not allowed to have headphones in the kitchen. I don't care if you're 23. I don't care if you're 19. I don't care if you're 50. No headphones in the kitchen unless there's no one else in the kitchen. And my kids are like, Ima, why? It's so annoying. And I'm like, because we are a family. And if our reality becomes that we are 7 individuals in the kitchen, everyone listening to their own AirPods, then what does that do for us as a family? And my kids were like, yeah, but we'll fight less. And I was like, but maybe we could fight less. Like, what's the goal? The goal is that we could all be in the kitchen and not be fighting. And like, I don't know, be singing in harmony and like saying, oh, you're so wonderful. And you're so wonderful. I'm so happy you're my sister. I'm so happy you're my brother. Okay, great. That's called the geula. Okay. But at least I said, the fighting is part of the rash. It's part of the noise of a family unit. It means you're interacting with each other. You're in conflict with each other. And part of what we are now is this big, very much everyone's AirPods are out. The whole Am Yisrael's AirPods are out right now. Now, why is that? It's because the geula is like here. Like every day, it's more here than it was the day before. But wow, it's noisy in the kitchen right now. And it's hard in the kitchen. And sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're right, and sometimes no one's right, and sometimes everyone's right. And sometimes even people do, like how we started. Sometimes people even really do really, really bad things. Really, really bad things. When I was a kid, like maybe 8, 9, 10, Mashu Kaza. I remember that for Hanukkah, there was one night of Hanukkah. This will anyone listening to this year will know how old I am when I say this. My brother got like a gigantic Transformers, massive action. Remember Transformers?
They're still around.
Oh, they are?
Yeah, you're not giving away your age.
Oh, okay. Well, old school Oh, no, what's a Transformers? You're right. It was a Voltron.
Still around.
Okay.
Can you
So,
translate?
yeah, Voltron. Okay.
I wasn't born then.
Right. Voltron was basically a toy as all the marketing. And basically, like, this is actually quite important because it was like different like spaceships and they all came together and formed like huge guy. And when they were all formed together, that guy was like very powerful and basically unstoppable. And when they were separate, they were not. Anyway, so my brother got this like massive Voltron doll. And I don't remember what I got. I don't know, probably like My Little Ponies or something, Hanukkah classic. Let me tell you what I did. I took his Voltron doll and I smashed it on the coffee table into about 1 billion pieces. Okay. It was not good. It was like really not my best moment. I was very, very upset and very, very jealous. That was wrong. I went to kid jail for that. You know what I'm saying? I went to kid jail. I got punished. I remember I had to go to Toys R Us with like my actual money, which was money because I was like 6, but she handed me cash. She was like, "This is your money," and I had to go and I had to pick out a new Voltron. I had to bring it to the cash register, and I had to like hand over this money. It was like the most bitter moment of my life. I did the crime. I did the time. Kid jail. That was wrong. But like, what happened next? I'm very close to my brother. Like, we moved on from the Voltron incident. Not saying it didn't take 2 minutes, but like we moved on. And that was a pretty bad thing. So obviously, lahavdil alfei, like we're talking about much more serious things. But we have to appreciate the fact that we're like all in the kitchen, the AirPods are out, everyone is, sort of fighting for different things, thinking about things. We're also fighting for the same things. Like one of the things that Rachel said in this like beautiful, critique that she said, like, it's not true that when I quoted Rabbi Lamb and he was saying there's a war between like Torah and between Medina Israel. Again, that's not Karen. That was Rabbi Lamb. I think it's true. Like, I mean, of course, I don't think that it's true that there's a full-on war between Torah and Medina Israel. But I think sometimes what that looks like is very, very fraught. So to just like sort of end and close, I brought you, this is like more last week. I can't believe I forgot my book. This is like so much more me. I like to do show and tell. So I brought you, I'll tell you what I brought. This is like a really neat and interesting copy of what's called colloquially the Eish Kodesh, Drasho Mishnot Hazan, which was written by the Piazetzner Rebbe in the Warsaw Ghetto. It's the reason there's a container, there's like a metal milk canister in the front is because that's how they found it. The Warsaw Ghetto was like a real thriving Jewish society, and they collected documents. People authored things. They wrote what life was like, and they took 3 years of drashot of the Piazetzner Rebbe, who could have been smuggled out of the ghetto and had his life spared. He died. He was murdered right before the ghetto was liquidated. But he said, no, I'm going to stay with my Hasidim. And we have these 3 years not of drashot. It's not complete because there were times where he couldn't write, either due to his own tsar and his own mourning, sickness, this, that. But it's pretty complete. It's actually organized by year. And each year there's like a different, almost philosophical theme. If anyone's interested, by the way, I also brought you, this is an amazing book by Henry Abramson, which like he goes through its reading of the Eish Kodesh, and it is like really magnificent. I highly recommend it. read one, you do it with this. So I brought you a piece from the last year that the Rebbe was in the ghetto, Tafshin Bet. It's a drasha he gave by Parshat Achash. And he says here, and the reason why I brought this is because this essentially underscores the Rebbe's philosophical thought that whole last year. Ora, yesh lish'ol, איך נתגלה הנבואה למשה רבנו, להשראת הנבואה צריכים שמחה. He said, it's interesting. One of the fundamental ingredients for nevuah is simcha. Like the halacha is you can't get nevuah unless you have simcha. And so how did Moshe Rabbeinu get nevuah? He had tsar. Like he was not in that state of simcha. Moshe Rabbeinu, chutz mitzarotav, shebikesh paro lahargo, besides the fact that he was distressed that Paro wanted to kill him, hayat miyatzer ma'od b'tzar Yisrael. And it's not just his initial nevuah, but Moshe spent his whole life of difficulties with Am Yisrael. A lot of times we know that Moshe was very unhappy. Ki ro'im shekol kach haya miyatzer b'tzaratam she Yisrael ad shamar v'im thank you machani na, right? Like that we see. So look at what the Piazetza Rebbe says. He says aval al zeh. I'm 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down. Aval al zeh nir elo Hashem b'pam ha'achat, like ha'pam ha'rishona b'sneh u'perish Rashi mishum imo anochi b'tzara. That Rashi famously says, why did God appear in this like brambly low sneh? To teach Bnei Israel, to give them the imagery, imo anochi b'tzara. Your suffering, I am with you in your suffering. Mipnei kshehu barach oz v'chad b'mko. So when Hashem is like in all his glory and things are right with the world, so then in order to get nevuah, the Navi has to have simcha. That when God is with them in their distress, but when Hashem is in the trenches with Am Yisrael, in the tsar, also the Navi can get nevuah in a state of tsar. And the whole year, a lot of the third year of the Rebbe's Divrei Torah focus on that idea that Hashem is with us in our tsar. Like in contrast, the first year is all about tshuva, seeing Hashem, recognizing Hashem, how can we be better? By the third year, the Rebbe is like, Hashem is with us in this. Mm-hmm. We are crying, and Hashem is also crying with us. And he says, maybe just for time's sake, we'll skip to the second paragraph. V'yesha ish ba'atzmo tama al atzmo halo nishbarani. He says, maybe someone, and now he's speaking to his chasidim in the ghetto, like, maybe I'm broken. Halo kimat tamid ani b'matzav shel bechi. Like, I'm always crying. They would walk in the streets of the Warsaw Ghetto in the winter, and there's one piece where one of the historians who lives in the ghetto talks about like how it was in the winter and he could hear like children crying outside, and he said, tomorrow I know I'm going to walk by that spot and their frozen bodies are going to be dead. It's the Warsaw Ghetto was the Rebbe says maybe a person will say like, I'm always bizarre. How could I ever learn Torah? Like, how could I ever have any kind of in this absolutely horrific circumstance? But then he goes on to say, but I understand that I'm in this horrific circumstance and Hashem is sitting right next to me. Hashem is in the house with me. And he's coming next to me with Torah. He is crying with me. And I'm just like jumping down a few lines that he, I'll tell you right 1 second. Maybe go do something like line 9. Okay. Right before that line, as bochel, צער שאדם מצטער בעצמו לבדו על צרותיו, יש שנשבר ונופל מהם. I'm just crying and thinking about the suffering, it's like on me, like I'm suffering. That's a person broken. But if I'm crying with Hashem together, it actually gives look. I know and I understand that Hashem is with me in that tsar. And so this is obviously the Rebbe. One of the things that we learned, one of the reasons that oh, I'm sorry, I just want to say, why did I say it has the milk can? Because the way that they found the Rebbe's writings and all these other documents, that after war, there were like Polish workers who were just working to clean up the ghetto. And basically a guy was shoveling, and his shovel hit the milk can. And they pulled it out of the ground and they had milk cans hidden in 3 separate places. And like once they found one, like it gave clues. I think they were in being able to find 2 of the 3, if I'm not mistaken. But essentially, like they pulled out all of these documents, and the Rebbe, when he gave these drashot, he actually said he wrote like basically his wish is that they get to his brother, who I believe was already in Israel, and so the goal of this was to give chizuk to his at the time, but also there are some eternal lessons. That's why the Eish Chodesh is so widely studied, because there are really eternal lessons that we can say from Baruch Hashem, this beautiful Beit Midrash, where like we're comfortable and we are not in that kind of tsar. But also having spent 2 years with our own insight to what that could be, watching for the account of the hostages, right? That we are doing it here to say we're in the Geula and Hashem is with us in these Chevlei Mashiach. And we can say we're gonna like cry and be angry and scream about it on our own, or we can say Hashem rock and be and scream about it with not it. That love. Hashem is in the balloon, us, and it is painful and it is complicated. And again, I think like that's part of what makes it so difficult to understand. Like the idea that we all have free will. It is our job and our responsibility to make good choices, to make the best choices, to make choices in line with Torah and mitzvot and halacha and hashkafa and kindness and chesed. It is also our job to have emunah and bitachon that runs the world. In the same way that Yaakov was supposed to encounter Esav, and Moshe was supposed to go to Paro, and Yonah was supposed to go to Nineveh, we're supposed to be here in this moment. We're so lucky. We're actually so lucky because all of us are, sorry, it's like such an emotional thing. We're so lucky because we're all here in a front row seat of the Geula. Like, and sometimes we don't like our front row seat because did you ever sit in the front row of a Broadway show? What happens when you sit in the front row of a Broadway show? The actors spit on you all the time. They do, because you're like right there and they're like enunciating and that's mamish what happens. So sometimes we feel like we get spit on, but we're so lucky because we're in the front row of like the greatest show in the world, and that is the Geula. And so when we are able to say, Hashem, we understand that you are with us in that, even though it is so hard, even though it is so painful, even though there are so many things that we don't understand, and even though there are so many things that we maybe really do understand and are like, why on earth is this happening? We can have emunah and bitachon that like Hashem is with us, and what we can do now is do our best and keep davening for the Geula Shlema, where Hashem will be able to like really reveal the truth and peace, and we'll be able to really go back to being like what Rabbi Sachs described and what the Baal Tanya described as one one body, totally connected, if not in the physical sense, but in the spiritual sense. We should all be blessed to see that B'mheira B'yameinu, and we have like again our front row seats, and like I don't know, even with all the I could think of nowhere I'd rather be. So everyone, Thank you, and we'll say Ad Khan.
Mhm.
And
Good.
if anyone has thoughts or questions, I'm so thrilled to hear them. I put my phone number on the paper. So if anyone wants to continue the discussion, b'simcha raba.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Well, yeah,